free to discuss on social media. So you can use the Twitter handle Achieve the Core, #CoreAdvocates. All right, so Tina and I are here as co-hosts tonight. My name is Shelby Cole. I'm a designer at Student Achievement Partners. I work mostly in the math space, and for at least the last couple of years have been really thinking about this idea of rehumanizing mathematics grounded in the work of Rochelle Gutierrez. And the work that these two teachers are going to share with us tonight, the changes that they've made are very close to my heart. They make me smile every time I talk to them. So I hope your heart gets warmed by some of their stories, as mine does every single time that I engage with them. And I'll invite Tina, if you want to do a quick introduction.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Starks, and I'm a designer at SAP. And really excited about you all being here with us today, and looking forward to a great discussion.
Great. And now the reason you all are here. So let me introduce these two fabulous teachers. The first one is Michelle Sperling, and I'm going to read a short bio. Michelle has been teaching for the last 14 years in Southern California. She started her career as a kindergarten teacher and has experience teaching reading intervention. Currently teaching first grade in Costa Mesa, Michelle has a passion for teaching. In the last 4 years, she has been part of a Math Fellows group in the Newport Mesa School District. Michelle devotes her time to create and maintain an environment where students thrive in all learning areas. Next, we have Sarah Manceau, who has been teaching for the last 10 years in Orange County. Before she started teaching kindergarten, she had experience with teaching reading interventions, second grade and third grade. Sarah has been part of the Math Fellows group also for the last 3 years. She creates a supportive and positive classroom environment where students feel challenged and engaged throughout quality instruction. Also, I'd like to mention John Drake, the Assistant Superintendent of Newport Mesa Unified School District, who has been extremely supportive of all of the work that these teachers are doing. We do a ton of planning together and really thinking about all voices and how to just make things better for children. And so I want to welcome our Newport Mesa folks, and let's get right to it. So I'm going to pull this down. If you haven't been to a coffee and conversations before, we try to keep it super informal and really look at each other and listen to the guests that we have tonight. So I'm going to pull the slides down so that we can see each other a little bit more if you have your camera on. There you all are. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. And let's see. All right, Michelle, Sarah, are you ready? Yes, let's do it. All right, so I know that some of the early work in mathematics professional learning was offered through your district. And what did it help you realize about your instruction and assessment practices? And in particular, how did your view of assessment change through that work?
Well, thank you so much, Shelby, for that introduction. I'm happy to get us started here. So I'm Michelle Sperling. I'm the first grade teacher here at Adams in Costa Mesa, California. 4 years ago, I started CGI training and Math Fellows that was offered by our district. And during that work, I participated in math labs where we collaborated with other colleagues to understand student thinking. And my biggest takeaway from being a part of math labs is that I was really able to learn and see what it was like to listen and elicit students' thinking through high-level critical questions that I facilitate. And so as a result, in my practice, I realized that the assessments I was providing for my students were not aligned to the standards. So that prompted us to create assessments that were aligned. And then I then was a part of a pilot to administer these revised assessment. And this was so eye-opening because the revised assessments provided me with the understanding of what my students know and how I can build upon what they've learned. So previously I was looking at, whether my student was getting the answer right or wrong, and really overlooking how they were doing the math. And so from that point on, I started to listen to students, and I looked at my students through an asset-based lens and really knowing what they can bring. And this right here is what started that shift in humanizing my practice and being more responsive to what they were learning and not just driving my instruction through a teacher's manual. So I found that targeting critical understandings gives me a chance to increase the student discussions that I have in my class and position my students so they can learn from each other. So now in my classroom, all of my students have the sense of ownership in their learning, and they can truly explore their creativity.
Right. And after Michelle came back so excited about her CGI work with our district, our K2 teams all joined because we just loved how excited she was. And like Michelle, you mentioned, an important part of our CGI work was looking at student work and assessments. And for me, my understanding of assessment really evolved from our work with unpacking the standards and better understanding the mathematical progressions. And after that better understanding of what the standards are wanting students to be able to do, it then became clearer that we needed to reevaluate the word assessment.
Yeah, that clarity of that word assessment really kind of made us look at, like, take that deep dive into the standard. And that deep dive really truly shifted our view. And so we're paying attention to what the students are doing, like I said before, but not only in math, but ELA as well. So if I'm understanding what my students are doing, I could truly prescribe the best opportunities and practice to move them towards the mastery of the grade level standards. And I think about this systematic scope and sequence of the progression of phonics development and the progression of phonological awareness. Before, we were following this scope and sequence within a program that didn't necessarily match with the needs and progress of our own students. So the systematicness was like following like 10 given lessons. And now, for example, I'm noticing my student Sergio has mastered CVCE words, and he's ready to begin working on our control vowels. He doesn't need that next 10 lessons that on CVCE patterns. He's got it. So tomorrow he'll start working on our control vowels.
And I also have a similar view on assessment, where before I was thinking of assessment as something that you were doing at the end of the unit or at the end of a learning segment. But now assessment is ongoing and it's an integral part of our instruction. So as we're working together, we're constantly checking and looking for what the students are doing. And we're thinking and reflecting on next steps rather than waiting for the end of the unit. And the pacing guides and the page turning of the curriculum, we noticed, were kind of forcing us to move on, and we weren't necessarily feeling the opportunity to go back. So in hindsight, some of the kids were getting left behind and some weren't advancing when they were ready to.
Yeah, Sarah, I like that point you made about not going back, because my practice before this work, like Sarah said, we would just do a summative assessment at the end of the unit. And then I would pull up the data on the computer and notice that all my kids were below grade level. And I would see this visual red donut. And this would dehumanize my teacher identity. And I would see myself as a failure. And I would move on. I would move on with the curriculum because I was worried I'd be off pace, off this pacing guide. And I would just move on to the next unit. And now I know that I just didn't give my students enough opportunities to understand the learning standards. I was moving on when my students weren't. And you could see how this shift changed my teacher identity, because now I'm not worried about that red donut anymore. I'm so excited to provide next steps for my students.
Right. And I was too looking at assessments that are usually graded on who is right and who is wrong. And not only is our assessment ongoing in our instruction, but our practice now focuses on looking at students through an asset-based lens and positioning students to be confident learners in the classroom. And, we've realized it's not about what's right or what's wrong. It's about how they're approaching the problem, how they're problem solving, and how they're making meaning.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Sarah. I learned so much more when they show and explain their thinking rather than providing only the answer. So With that, I do want, John, if I could have you kind of chime in here and talk about what led this ELA pilot. John Drake is the assistant superintendent in the district that both Sarah and I work in Newport Mesa. So could you kind of give us a little background on that?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, Michelle, for that. Just to be really brief, a few years ago, we had started a research practice partnership with University of California, Irvine, and with Jody Guareno from Orange County Department of Ed at one of our Title I sites. It didn't happen to be the site that Sarah and Michelle were at. And we've been working on improving math teaching and learning. Quite a bit, after about a year's time, quite a bit of momentum in math instruction and learning was built, and especially in our primary grades, in our K1 and 2 classrooms. And when you walked into, after about a year's time of this partnership, when you walk into classrooms, the level of students' intellectual engagement during math learning was actually palpable. You could feel the buzz, you could hear the buzz. You could feel the sense-making opportunities kids were given, and the sense-making that they were engaged in. And then after about a year of that, in the fall of 2021, after this focus of improving mathematics for kids at this site, a teacher recognized the level of intellectual engagement during reading instruction wasn't on par with math. It was a little stale, and she sensed that students were relatively disengaged or not intellectually engaged in the reading instruction. The buzz wasn't in classrooms during literacy instruction. The teacher asked, how do we get students to love to read as much as they love to do math? And we all kind of, our mouths kind of dropped wide open as she said that. And we said, I don't know, let's figure it out. So we sought out to try and answer that question. And a small group of teachers, Jody Guareno from the Orange County Department of Ed, myself, and a few district administrators began meeting weekly from about September through December with David Page, professor at Northern Illinois University and the director of the Jerry L. Johns Literacy Clinic in Illinois. And our meetings focused on just our learning, about how kids learn to read and those progressions and the system that's behind those progressions. And then the spring of 2021, after working with David for about 6 months, we had a deeper understanding of how kids learn to read, and we decided to try a few new instructional routines that were systematic, that were following the phonics and phonemic awareness progressions, but were more intellectually engaging, and we anticipated would be more effective for students in learning to read. We used instructional routines to develop phonological awareness, phonics, and word study, along with some diagnostic assessments along the way. And we felt like students were more engaged, more intellectually engaged, and were making progress, but we weren't really sure. We didn't gather data for this first set in the spring in any sort of a systematic way. So coming into this year, we decided to formalize and study the work we had done with the routines and reading that we were trying in the spring of the previous year. And that's when we brought in this additional site. And the additional site happens to be where Sarah and Michelle were.
That's great. I love that, working on the math side, I love that somebody said, how do we get children to love reading like they love math? So I think if folks work in math, they've probably never heard that question, right? How do we get children to love reading the way that they love math? But because they had so intentionally focused on mathematics and getting children to love math, that was the question they were hearing in their district. So Michelle and Sarah, it sounds like you became part of this pilot now and said, like, let's take some of this stuff that we're doing, that we're seeing such joy in mathematics, and how do we begin to bring that into the ELA classroom as well? And so would you mind sharing with us some of the changes that you made in English language arts literacy so that those two things felt more comparable and both joyful for students?
Right. So before we kind of get into our shift to ELA, I just think it's so important that we really touch on the fact that there was this buzz, like John said, during math at the other side as well, because we were seeing where a lot of students shut down during math or say that they don't like math. But with that CGI instruction and training, we definitely saw students loving it. And that was because they were agents of their own thinking and they were sense makers and they knew their ideas were valued. And it was something that our entire classroom community was doing together.
Yeah, that classroom community, it just truly created this culture where all students were heard. It gave our students this sense of identity and confidence in math, and their ideas were always valued, not only by their teacher, but by their peers as well. And so it was with this shift in humanizing teaching and learning, our norms were grounded upon the idea that each idea is valued. And it was an easy transition to implement the same values right into ELA.
And I know I've talked about this with multiple people, but I'm actually still a little embarrassed that I didn't see that transfer right away to ELA. Because after 2 years of CGI with math, I was still teaching reading my old way and not seeing that transfer of how the same principles of teaching through that asset-based lens and cognitively guided instruction could also be applied to reading instruction. So for me, before, they were engaged because they were doing or saying something, but it really took this pilot for me to rethink what student engagement really looks and sounds like. And through conversations, my students are making sense of things differently than before, where I had been trying to tell them what to do or what to say with routines now that seems so robotic. So we're definitely starting to think of engagement a bit differently now, and we're really trying to focus on what it means or looks like with intellectual engagement.
Yeah, I had that same aha moment as you, Sarah. It's like we were part of our district's primary phonics curriculum program, and we followed that program religiously. And students for that program were given a universal screener, and then our students were split into groups, and they were pulled out into different classrooms and generally remained in those groups throughout the school year. And that's how we taught foundational skills to our students from kindergarten to second grade.
Right. And like you said, Michelle, after that universal screener at the beginning of the year, students were grouped and then kind of tracked in a way because they stayed in that group. And the adopted program would test students only after a certain amount of lessons, and then they'd advance to the next lessons in the sequence, which definitely differs from what we're doing today, because now we assess students as we notice successful learning of the task. So what we thought was flexible grouping really wasn't, because they couldn't really move forward unless a certain number of lessons had been taught. So now looking back at the depth of how we know our students today, I realized that I didn't necessarily know my students as literacy learners, because if they weren't placed with me, they were under someone else's watch. And I wasn't really able to make connections to their literacy work throughout the day like we do now. And we're definitely noticing this residue with the kids, because, for example, if we're writing, they're getting up and going over to an anchor chart that we co-developed during our phonics and blending.
Yeah, I had to say, like, I love seeing that students have that residual learning throughout the day. And it is truly surprising that we didn't value the same CGI practice as we do in ELA sooner. And I think it's because this is what the district pushed out to the teachers. You know, it was the culture, you know, follow the script, teach the materials without intentionally understanding how students were making sense of the content.
Right. And it's the adopted program, Michelle, and it kind of gets internalized as this adopted expectation. It's the pacing guide and the things that you're trying to accommodate to check off those boxes of, okay, I'm doing this, this, and this today. And we're being told that that's systematic, but now we're starting to understand systematic as the progression students go through as they're learning. So for example, my kindergarten students all know letter sounds, and we're working on reading consonant, vowel, consonant words. So we've started to add digraphs and blends because we know that's next in the progression. And I think about systematic as knowing the sequence in ways skills and understanding develops, and understanding where students are in a progression and planning experiences to advance that. So looking back, I wasn't really wanting to accept the fact that maybe I wasn't implementing best practices, and maybe that's why it took me a while to see the transfer. But I really wasn't knowing what was best to drive that instruction to move them forward. So it's really these moments of reflection that Michelle, you and I are having with our team, and realizing, well, wait a minute, we value their sense making and thinking in math. So why can't we value the same things and principles in reading? And after reflecting and having these conversations, we've really started to ask, okay, what can we do differently to change this or to fix this? And it's in those conversations with our entire team that we frequently quote Maya Angelou and just tell each other, know better, do better during these sometimes uncomfortable conversations.
Right. I mean, that's like our quote, know better, do better. And thankfully, John Drake has a deep understanding of teaching and learning, and he's been a big part of our learning over the last 4 years. He truly believes in us, and we have agency. So I look back at the beginning of the school year when we started this pilot, and it leads back to our professional development with Young-Soo Kim, who is a professor and researcher at UCI, and as well as we did this work with Jody Guarino. And this PD helped us better understand foundational skills and the progressions of how students learn how to read. That was the pivotal moment in the shift of our reading instruction. It was the knowledge that has been critical as we started to notice student thinking. And as teachers, we were really able to make sense of what we were seeing in the classroom and connect that to the learning progression. And that PD anchored the work we've done since then, learning from our practice in our practice. Some of the most impactful learning has been when I notice a student does something and I connect and collaborate with Jody and my colleagues, and we talk about what happened in the class and what it might mean and what we may do next for our students. And so another big part of the PD was rehearsing, and we were rehearsing the instructional routines, trying them out with their students, and also reflecting. So one day, an example of this, one day I was working on words like bench and lunch. And as students were writing these words, I started to notice that many were writing BECH for bench or LUCH, leaving out that N. So it was in that moment, we decided to give students a phoneme, each phoneme, and blend that like, but N, and then add the digraph at the end, and that if the kids, what we were noticing is if the kids weren't writing the N, they probably weren't hearing it. So it made me think, how could we be more intentional like this every day? And we've made our practice public, and this has changed how we collaborate now. We talk about things we notice and how we might work on those things together. So everything is grounded in evidence of student thinking and developing our students as confident readers and writers as well.
And I don't think it's just our district where this happens, but a lot of our PD was based on a program that we were either adopting or have adopted, or how you can use a certain program better, where our PD, like you mentioned, Michelle, was with Young-Soo Kim. It was research-based, and it was grounded both in literacy research and also research into how adults learn. And it wasn't about a specific program. So the PD was different. We were analyzing and engaging in activities. We were watching videos, and we were looking at research around the simple view of reading. And it provided us with cognitive tools. It felt like we were back in college again. And that was really the beginning of the learning. And we continue to learn every day in and from our practice.
Yes, that lifelong learner, what this learning really helped us to understand is that we are teaching children and not teaching a program. That is the biggest shift from building upon what we know about cognitively guided instruction in math. We've built upon this method of teaching right into ELA.
Right, and it's definitely not about a program. It's looking at the standards and understanding what students are expected to do. And kindergartners are expected to do so much within the reading and writing standards. So one of the main goals for the pilot in kindergarten was that all students should know all their sounds by November 1st to give them access to all those standards. And this was a huge shift because our previous program focused on identifying letter names. Before they could even access our reading program, they had to know at least 20 lowercase letter names. So that was our instructional focus before at the beginning of the year, so they could pass the screener and begin a reading group. And we definitely had an aha moment early on when having a group conversation where Jody said, letter names don't help you learn to read. Letter sounds help you read. And while letter names are important too, they definitely shouldn't be a gatekeeper to phonics instruction. So a huge part of our instructional shift was learning letter sounds with weekly beginning sorts and singing a song that incorporated letter sounds and names throughout the day. And guess what happened by November 1st? Almost every single student knew every sound. And that's just progress we hadn't seen before. And it's definitely changed my vision and my beliefs of what students are capable of. We started to see how this directly impacted their reading and writing throughout the day. And another key shift in our instruction, which Michelle, you can also share and first, was that our instructional model needed to change. Before, we had been doing the universal screener, students were placed in groups, and then those groups were taken to different rooms or different places. And there really wasn't any coherence for students throughout the day. And as a teacher, I didn't necessarily know my students as readers and writers in the way that I do now. So we were all doing similar tasks, or we're all doing similar tasks now, and have a better cohesive understanding of what our students can do and what they know.
Yeah, so connecting what you said, I love what you said about like how we know students like now as readers and writers. It's so crazy to think back, like, oh my goodness, like really understanding what they can do. And before, we use this excuse me. Now we're using this diagnostic assessment to see what students know and what they're coming in with. And I love that the assessment that we use, it follows the progression of reading. We really understand what they know and we can target what they need and what they need. And so now I have students that see patterns and make generalizations. So for example, a snapshot in my classroom, I was teaching S-blends and I introduced the words such as skin and skip and scan and scab. And I noticed that my students were having misconceptions on whether write a C or K for this K sound. So previously I would have just told them what spelling to write. But now I give them opportunities to make that generalization on their own. So the next day I intentionally wrote words in column with SC and SK. And it was in that lesson, I had a student say, Mrs. Sperling, I noticed that the words with SK all have the vowel I after it. And so, this right there connects to the shift of responsive instruction based on what we know about our students. Students are making meaning as they're discovering spelling patterns. We are, as teachers, are intentionally selecting words that nudge them to generalize those patterns on their own. And another experience just last week, we had a group of students working on our control vowels. And this one student noticed that the words in park all ended with the k sound. And so Jack was looking back at the anchor chart that we worked on earlier in the year with back and stick and dock. And he asked me, he said, is there something about the vowel sound that helps us know which letter or letters to put at the end of the word? And I just smile because I just love this learning. I just love seeing this learning through their eyes, because these weren't discussions that we had in prior years. Kids were not making meaning and excited as they are now. It's so fun.
I'd like to take a moment to highlight a question that was asked, excuse me, sparking from a comment you made, Michelle, about collaborating more with your colleagues.
Yeah.
And so the question is just really asking if you could elaborate a little bit more on how collaboration has shifted in the work. I think that would provide some guidelines on how folks could approach.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Collaboration, when I started teaching, I used to think, he's like, get our plan books with our partner teacher and, figure out who's making which copies, which art project we're going to do today. And you do that. Okay, let's go. And now there's a total different shift because we are working so closely together. It's a team. With this pilot, we have the kinder teachers, the first grade teachers, we have John, we have Jody, we have any reading teachers that are there that support us. They are a part of our collaboration, and we meet every other week to discuss what we notice our students are doing. And it truly became we are now like so intentional with our practice, bouncing ideas off of each other, saying, I wonder if we try writing words, like let's be intentional for the next lesson. If they're getting the B and D mixed up in kinder, let's intentionally write words B and D and see where we can kind of make that they can understand the pattern and the formation of the letters to kind of notice that on their own. So it's not only like every other week we're meet, it's in the moment. Daily collaboration is key as well, because we notice what our students are doing and what instructional moves we can do to help our students move through that reading progression. So thank you for that question, because I'm so excited about my collaboration, or our collaboration with the team. I think that in itself, along with me, Sarah and I really like diving in and noticing student work. I think the collaboration is such a big part of my practice today.
Great. So we definitely want to give folks time for breakouts, but we wouldn't be calling this Humanize without the humans, right? So, one of the things I love about talking to Michelle and Sarah is just stories about people, because they talk so frequently just about children and sometimes children's families and caregivers. And I just want to give you a moment to share any particular stories. Don't make me cry tonight, Michelle. Share any stories that you have about children and families, because the human element of this is really why we're here.
Oh my goodness, Shelby, the humanizing, I just love this question, because we do really see the value of humanizing students' experiences. And like I said, seeing the learning through the students' confidence, self-agency, it inspires me every day. So like oh my gosh, like you cry, made me, oh my, I'm like getting emotional on my own. So like in any classroom, there, as you all know, there's like a range of academic and social emotional needs. And I would like to share a story about Anthony. He was recently exited from the special education program and is now mainstreamed in my class. And his IEP focuses on social and communication skills. And through this ELA work, he is excelling in all of these areas. So for example, during our pilot, he's making connections and extending them through all parts of the day. And so he's so confident when he's sharing in the class, and his excitement is so infectious. So like, later in the day, we're reading, silent reading ish. And we all smile when he shouts, ICCK, and when he's reading his Dogman book. It's the cutest thing. But I do have one other short story I want to share, because I know this humanizing is, it's in our classroom, but it actually goes beyond our four walls of our classroom. And in the fall, I was fortunate enough to meet with all my students' families to discuss the child's progress, in our conference for the first trimester. And Miranda's mom stands out in particular because she was personally touched by our conversation about her daughter. And so Miranda's the youngest of three, and she's used to hearing, she's used to hearing in our conference about what her daughters don't know. And our conversation gave a picture of what Miranda can do. And she was moved to tears, letting me know that she's never had a conference that highlighted all the brilliant things that her daughter can do. And so as a result, this allowed us to form a trusting relationship throughout the year. And as you guys know, with the support at home, it goes well beyond just not only what happens here, but throughout her life.
I'm so glad you mentioned conferences, Michelle, because that was something that we were all excited about, our team. A lot of the parent feedback was eye-opening this year because there was just so many stories and examples of how their children are excited about learning and they're excited about reading at home. And so many of these conferences and conversations ended up talking about our song that we sing throughout the day. And, their children are singing it to their siblings. They're singing it when they're cleaning up toys. And not only are they singing the song, but the sounds from the song they're applying when they're driving with their parents and they're stopped at a stoplight. Parents were saying they're trying to sound out the street name. So it's just really cool to see the excitement that parents also had for their children and hearing about that transfer from school to home. And one mom in particular was proud to share that they were having cereal at breakfast and her child said, I can spell milk, right? And then asked for a piece of paper to write down the sounds he heard in milk. And that was way back in October. So I know we're both excited to meet with parents again coming up to continue hopefully to hear about that buzz going on at home as well. And before I share my story about one of my students, I think it's important to note that Michelle and I both teach at a Title I school that has a large EL population, and that can come with some misconceptions. And it's not uncommon for students to come into kindergarten new to this country or having little or no exposure to the English language. And this year, I have 3 students who would be identified or grouped as newcomers. And my first story is about a newcomer named Jose, who's changed those misconceptions for those who are willing to get to know him through an asset-based lens. So I'm going to get emotional, Michelle. So previously before this shift, students like Jose would be pulled out of class to get intervention on reading or language skills, where now Jose is given the same access as all the other students in my class during phonics. And he's thriving and he achieved his sounds like his peers by the first. And it wasn't just, I think this is why it's so emotional. It wasn't just an academic evolution for Jose, it was a social emotional one. At the beginning, he would self-soothe when he was nervous, but now he just gets up, he likes to participate, and he sees himself in the same lens that he sees his peers. And he's excited to share his thinking. His peers are learning from him and he knows it. So these are just some of the several emotional examples that Michelle and I are proud to share with you. And we just thank you for listening to our journey as we try to rehumanize our students in our classroom.
We want to take a couple of questions if we can, but we did see one very important question that folks are wanting to know, Sarah, and that is, tell us about this song. So if folks have other questions, put them in the chat and Sarah is going to enlighten us on this amazing song that kids are going home singing to their siblings.
So this song, like I mentioned before, we sang 5 to 6 times throughout the day. So I think that repetition also really made those connections throughout the day when they were reading, listening to a story, or writing. In addition, really quick before I get into the song, we did beginning sound sorts with picture cards each week. And that also was part of the goal of knowing sounds by November 1st. So the song teaches letter sounds and names, and it's accompanied by a chart. with letters and an image for each beginning sound. And it's based off of Barbara Milne's song. So it goes apple, apple, a. So we tweaked it a little bit to add the letter name with the sound. And that repetition, like I mentioned, I think is what caused them to do it throughout the day at home, in the car, and they could sing it on their own over and over again without us or without the poster. And that poster that we have for the song was on the whiteboard, but then they also had a smaller chart of it for a tool that they could use. And the chart or their tool was connecting the letter sound and name to the uppercase and lowercase letter shapes. And that familiar object with the beginning sound was also there, along with that voice and print connection. So like I said, they have the smaller format or tool that they could use throughout the day. And then, and there were also, of course, kinesthetic movements that went along with each sound.
Great, Sarah. We are all looking forward to the album. And there was one other good question in the chat, and that is for schools that are looking to replicate some of what you're doing, do you have a place that they might start?
That's a really good question. So because of my training in math, I think one huge piece is listening. I mean, I know I used to think I was listening, but now I'm like listening. So really, that word assessment, it means sit beside. I take the time to sit beside and really listen to my students so I can understand what they know and build upon their learning. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to add.
No, I definitely think that listening and trying to elicit student thinking. But I mean, I think our evolution, Michelle, at our site and with our team was just really like better understanding progressions and looking at the standards and really diving deep into like, what are they supposed to be able to do? So I think really having that understanding is what kind of opened our eyes and shifted our instruction away from looking at just a program.
Great, thank you so much, both of you. I just have a few closing slides, and if you didn't get their emails, they're right here. We'll put them in the chat, I think. I don't know why my mailbox opens like that. Hold on. See, I told you. You can see my mailbox, right? This is why I don't do the Zoom, you all. I'm back. I went back, you guys. This is the program we're designing. You're not supposed to go from approaching back to emerging, but I just proved it's possible. Anything is possible.
Emails are in the chat.
What's that? Thank you.
Their emails are in the chat, so you're good.
I don't know what's going on. I can't get rid of my mailbox being open. Do you happen to have the slides available, Tina, on your screen? Okay. All right, thanks. So we are going to drop just a couple of resources into the chat. First of all, the team from Newport Mesa also has done a 3-part blog series on Achieve the Core. So if you haven't checked that out, it's called Humanizing Assessment, and it walks through part of the process that many of their teachers, not just Michelle and Sarah, but many of their teachers, principals, and other administrators went through to really think about assessment differently. And we're also going to link to an article by Lisa Jilk, which is on supporting teacher noticing of students' mathematical strengths. And so even for folks who are really good intentioned and say, yes, I'm always thinking about students' assets, what we find is that it's really easy to revert back. We are in a system that often uses assessment to look at what is wrong. And no matter, even folks I know in the space who are researching in the space of student assets still find themselves going back to sort of the system that surrounds us. So it's a really good article that talks about why we do that and gives some practical suggestions. So we will link to those resources. And then if you want to go to the next slide for me. The next couple of coffee and conversations are here on February 9th. We have Centering Authentic Youth Leadership and Education. That'll be Brenda Aviles and Molly Cohen from Diversity Talks. And on February 24th, so February is a busy month, we have 2 of them. How can we design inclusive literacy classrooms that foster trust and community by Dr. Davis from the University of North Carolina. We invite you to those, of course. And then finally, we would love your feedback. So please click the link. We will also throw that in the chat. And I apologize, Tina, for at the last minute having you throw up the slides and the links. But please give us some feedback on tonight's session. We really appreciate hearing from you. And if you aren't already part of the Core Advocate Network and getting all of the information about additional offerings that we have, please use the bit.ly to sign up and join us so that you get consistent emails about what we are offering. And I want to appreciate our guests tonight. As always, love talking to both of you, love learning from you, and really glad that we got to share the Newport Mesa work and especially the work of these 2 teachers with folks from across the country. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. And thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jody. And I'm sure there will be more to learn. So thank you so much for coming tonight.